The prairie wind howled across the open Montana plains as the rain came down in soft sheets, wetting the tall golden grass. It was a quiet stretch of land, miles from town, where time seemed to stand still. No one came out here except for cattle. And Coyote Sands' Silas Monroe, the man the locals called the Ghost of Willow Bend. Silas, once a decorated rodeo rider, and now a withdrawn rancher in his late 30s, had spent the last 3 years living alone on his family's land. Since the death of his wife, Evelyn, he'd spoken to no one unless absolutely necessary. The grief had hollowed him. He sold off most of his livestock, boarded up the guest rooms, and rode the fences each morning in silence, as if trying to keep the world out and the memories in. It was on one such morning, just before dawn, that Silas decided to ride beyond his usual route down the slope past the East Corral, where the old railway cut through the land like a scar. The tracks had long been abandoned, rusted, and overgrown, but Silas still found comfort in riding near them, as Evelyn used to walk that route every spring to collect wild sage. That's when he heard it, a sound that did not belong in the wind or the rain, a baby's cry. He pulled his horse to a stop, heart clenching in disbelief. He dismounted quickly, his boots splashing in the wet grass, and followed the sound toward the tracks. There, near a collapsed signal post, he saw a small, trembling bundle swaddled in a threadbare green blanket, resting on a flattened patch of earth just inches from the tracks. Silas knelt down slowly. The child, no more than 8 months old, was soaked but alive. Its cheeks were flushed from the cold, and its little hands reached out toward him, as if recognizing something. But it wasn't the cry, or the strange location, or even the child's fragile form that made Silas's breath catch in his throat. It was the bracelet. Wrapped loosely around the child's tiny wrist was a beaded leather bracelet, with an old turquoise stone in the center. Evelyn's bracelet, the one she wore every day for 10 years, the one Silas had placed on her wrist in her coffin before the lid was closed forever. His fingers trembled as he gently touched the bracelet. He whispered hoarsely, "How in God's name do you have this?" The child blinked at him through the rain and let out another wail. Silas stared into its deep green eyes, Evelyn's exact shade, and felt the walls he'd built around his grief begin to crack. He didn't know where this baby had come from. He didn't know how that bracelet had resurfaced. But he knew one thing with terrifying certainty. This wasn't an accident. Silas Monroe rode back to his ranch with one hand clutching the reins, and the other holding the tiny baby close to his chest beneath his oilskin coat. The child's cries had settled into soft, exhausted whimpers, its little body shaking with cold and fear. But Silas's heart was pounding louder than any wind howling through the pines. The bracelet, that old leather strap with turquoise beads, and the center stone cracked in a very particular way. Just like when Evelyn dropped it on the barn floor years ago. He had buried her with that bracelet. He remembered it vividly. Evelyn had asked to wear it just one more time, even as she lay in her final rest. He remembered fastening it gently around her wrist with trembling hands, sobbing silently as the funeral director closed the coffin lid. So how in God's name was it now? On the wrist of a baby left beside the old railroad? He didn't want to believe it. His mind screamed for logic. Maybe someone had stolen it from her grave. Or maybe it was a look-alike. But deep down, in a place he rarely let himself feel anymore, Silas knew it was hers. Back at the ranch, Silas kicked open the door with his boot and carried the baby inside. The cabin, though plain and somber, was warm, lit by the fire he'd started before his ride. He set the child on the worn leather couch and quickly grabbed a soft woolen blanket from Evelyn's old hope chest. It still smelled faintly of lavender. He dried the baby carefully, wrapping it tightly to keep warm. Its crying had stopped completely now. The child gazing at him, with large green eyes so familiar it made Silas recoil slightly. He looked down at the bracelet again. Still there. Same stone. Same wear on the leather. There was no mistaking it. Silas poured some formula he'd found in a long-forgotten pantry canister into a bottle left over from when his sister had visited with her twins years ago. It was expired, but it would have to do. The baby drank like it hadn't eaten in days. He guessed the child was 7 or 8 months old, just old enough to sit up with support. Not quite old enough to speak. After feeding, the baby nestled into the crook of Silas's arm, eyes fluttering closed. He stared down at the child, bewildered. "Where the hell did you come from?" he whispered. But the baby only breathed quietly, lips moving slightly in sleep. Silas stood and paced the room. He wasn't good with people, hadn't been since Evelyn died. He hadn't spoken to anyone in over a year except Hank Carter, the feed store owner, and that was only to grunt prices. But this, a baby on his doorstep, no. On the tracks wearing something buried with his wife. He knew he couldn't ignore this. He reached for the old landline. It hadn't rung in months. Dust coated the receiver. He hesitated, then dialed the only number he remembered, Sheriff Marla Jenkins. She picked up after 2 rings. "Monroe?" Her voice crackled. "You all right? I found a baby," Silas said, flatly. A pause. What? A baby. Down by the old railroad, left under a crate. Wearing, he clenched his jaw, "wearing my wife's bracelet." Silence. "That doesn't make any sense," she said finally. "Are you sure? I buried her with it." Another pause. "I'll be out there in half an hour." Silas hung up. He sat back down beside the baby, whose breathing had deepened into a gentle rhythm. His eyes wandered to the fireplace mantel. On it sat the only photo he kept visible, Evelyn and him on their wedding day. Her smile was like sunlight. Round her wrist, in the photo, was the same bracelet. He picked up the photo and set it beside the baby. The resemblance was haunting. Same cheekbones, same delicate lips, that same tiny cleft in the chin. He swallowed hard. "Who are you, little one?" he murmured. As if in response, the baby stirred and opened its eyes again, deep green, shimmering, almost wise. Silas had buried a future with Evelyn. He'd buried dreams, hope. The thought of children had once been too painful to even imagine. But now, with this baby before him, something long frozen inside him began to shift, not melt, not yet, but shift. As the wind pushed against the cabin walls and the fire crackled softly, Silas found himself whispering a name, not his own, not Evelyn's, but something new, something that came to him from nowhere. "Juniper," he said, stroking the baby's hair. "That's what she would have named you." And the baby smiled in her sleep. By the time Sheriff Marla Jenkins pulled up in her dusty patrol truck, the rain had eased into a quiet drizzle. The sun was peeking through distant clouds, casting a dull amber light across the prairie. But inside Silas Monroe's cabin, the tension was thick as smoke. Silas opened the door before she knocked. Sheriff Jenkins, a lean, sharp-eyed woman in her mid-50s with a gray braid tucked under her Stetson, stepped inside and paused. Her eyes immediately went to the bundle cradled in Silas's arms. The baby was awake now, squirming softly and sucking on its fingers. Silas had wrapped her in one of Evelyn's old shawls. "Silas," Marla said slowly, "when you said you found a baby, I thought maybe you'd been out in the sun too long." He didn't smile. She was down by the railroad, under an old crate, crying her lungs out. Marla moved closer and leaned in to inspect the child. "She looks healthy," she murmured. Then her gaze dropped to the tiny wrist. Her breath caught. "Is that Evelyn's bracelet?" Silas said flatly. "The one I buried with her." Marla looked up sharply. "Silas, are you absolutely sure?" He walked to the mantel, grabbed the wedding photo, and handed it to her. "See it there? Same leather, same turquoise stone, even the crack in the middle." Marla studied the image, then looked back at the baby, whose eyes were now locked on her with startling calm. "That's not something you find in a store," she admitted. "I know," Silas said quietly. "And this kid, she's got Evelyn's eyes." Marla sighed and removed her hat. "I'll be honest, Silas, this doesn't make sense. No one's reported a missing child in over a month. Not in this county, anyway. No notes, no signs, just the baby. You checked the area, scouted around. No tracks, just the crate and the wind." Marla knelt beside the child and reached a finger toward her. The baby caught it and giggled softly. "She doesn't seem scared," the sheriff noted. "That's strange. Babies separated from their parents usually cry nonstop, but she seems calm, almost like she knows she's supposed to be here." Silas glanced down at the girl, her small hand clutching his shirt. "Yeah, like she's been here before." Marla looked up, brows furrowed. "You think this is some kind of sign?" He shrugged. "I don't know what to think, but someone left her there for me to find. Not by accident. They wanted me to see that bracelet." "You think someone dug up Evelyn's grave?" she asked gently. "I'll find out," he said, a shadow darkening his face. Marla rose and paced. "I should take her to County Child Services, file a report." "Standard procedure." Silas stiffened. The thought of handing her over now after the storm, the discovery. That bracelet sent a twist of nausea through his gut. "No," Marla blinked. "What? Not yet. Just give me a few days," he said. "Let me figure this out." "Silas, she came to me," he interrupted. "Whoever left her there knew I'd find her, that I'd recognize the bracelet. You can't tell me that's a coincidence." Marla hesitated. She had known Silas before the grief swallowed him. She'd watched him fall in love with Evelyn, watched them build their life out here with nothing but a dream and a patch of stubborn land. After Evelyn's death, Marla had knocked on his door at least a dozen times. Never got more than a nod in return. Now, he was standing here, holding a baby like it was something sacred. "You planning to keep her?" she asked. "I'm not planning anything," he muttered. I need time." Marla studied his face for a long moment. Finally, she sighed. "All right, I'll give you 72 hours. But I've got to file something. If nobody claims her by then, we'll talk options." He nodded, grateful. "Thank you." She handed him her card. "If anything changes, or you remember anything, call me." Marla stepped out into the mist, pausing at the door. "Silas," he looked up. "I don't believe in ghosts or signs," she said. "But that baby, there's something about her. You're not crazy." Then she left, back inside. Silas sat beside the fire again. The baby was now asleep, her tiny hands still clutching Evelyn's shawl. He whispered softly, "Who left you there, little one?" The next morning broke cold and silent, the sky washed in silver mist. Silas Monroe was already saddling his horse by the time the sun crested over the ridgeline. The baby whom he'd begun calling Juniper in his thoughts was swaddled and sleeping inside the cabin, safe in a wooden cradle he'd pulled down from the attic. It had once belonged to his sister's twins and still bore faded carvings from a gentler time. But Silas had business now, business that made his gut churn. He rode hard through the fog, his breath rising in clouds and his mind racing faster than his horse. The cemetery sat atop a grassy knoll 2 miles east of the ranch, surrounded by weather-worn iron fencing and guarded by an ancient oak tree. Crows flapped and scattered as Silas dismounted and opened the gate. He stood at the edge of Evelyn's resting place, his heart thudding. Her stone was still there. Evelyn Ray Monroe, beloved wife, Gentle Soul, 1984 to 2021. A fresh film of dew clung to the chiseled letters. He knelt beside the grave and placed his gloved hand on the soil, undisturbed at first glance, but as he pressed his fingers deeper into the earth, something wasn't right. The ground had been packed tightly when she was buried. He remembered. But now it was soft, as if someone had tampered with it, dug and reburied it recently. He stood and turned in slow circles, scanning the land for signs, footprints, tire tracks, anything. Nothing obvious. Whoever had done it had been careful. Still, it was enough. Silas mounted his horse and rode straight back to the cabin, blood pounding in his ears. Whoever had taken that bracelet hadn't just stolen from the grave, they'd sent him a message. But what kind of message involved a baby? Back at the cabin, Juniper was awake, cooing softly and chewing on her blanket. Silas scooped her up and held her close, her warmth grounding him. He glanced down at the bracelet again. Still there, still impossible. His thoughts swirled in 1,000 directions, and one kept rising to the top. Evelyn's sister. Claire. They hadn't spoken since the funeral. Too many bitter words and too much pain had passed between them. She lived in Colorado now, last he heard. She was stubborn and sharp and always thought Silas was too closed off for her baby sister. But if anyone had a connection to Evelyn's belongings or secrets, maybe it was her. He sat at the table, baby cradled in one arm, and pulled out a dusty address book from the drawer. His fingers flipped through it until he found her number. He hesitated, then picked up the landline. The phone rang for times before a voice answered. Claire Whitaker. Claire, it's Silas. A long pause. Well, that's a name I didn't expect to hear again. I wouldn't call if it wasn't important. Go on then. I found something. Know someone. A baby out by the railroad tracks. And she was wearing Evelyn's bracelet. Silence. I buried Evelyn with that bracelet, he added. More silence. Claire, is there anything you need to tell me? When she finally spoke, her voice had changed, softer, shaken. Silas, I know. I don't know anything about that. The bracelet. I was sure you buried her with it. I saw you do it. I did. And you're saying this baby what? Just appeared, left there. Like someone wanted me to find her. Another pause. Did Evelyn ever tell you anything before she passed? About secrets? Or anything that didn't make sense? Silas's brow furrowed. What are you talking about? There was a letter, Claire said slowly, about a month before she died. She sent me something. She told me not to open it unless something happened to her. I kept it in my safe, never read it. Do you still have it? I do. I'll get it. Silas held his breath, heart hammering, as Claire set down the phone and disappeared for a moment. When she returned, her voice trembled. I've got it. Do you want me to open it now? No. He said quickly, send it to me. Please, overnight if you can. I will. She paused, then said gently, Silas, do you think that baby is somehow connected to Evelyn? I mean really connected. I don't know, he whispered, looking down at Juniper's sleeping face. But if she is, then everything I thought I knew about my wife is about to change. That night, as the wind howled around the ranch house and coyotes cried in the distance, Silas held the baby close and stared into the fire. His world had once been made of stone, moving, empty, silent. Now it was made of questions, and something told him the answers were going to hurt. The next day brought a strange, heavy stillness to the plains. No wind, no birdsong. Even the cattle stayed quiet behind the fenceline. It felt like the land was holding its breath, waiting. Silas Monroe sat at the kitchen table, his eyes fixed on the cardboard envelope in front of him. It had arrived by courier at dawn, just as Claire promised. The return address read, C. Whitaker, Estes Park, CO. Contents: one sealed letter. Handwritten on the front of the envelope in delicate script were the words, "For Claire, only if something happens." But now Claire had passed it on, and Silas was about to open a letter from his dead wife. He looked down at the baby Juniper lying in her blanket on the table. She stared up at him with those vivid green eyes, as though she somehow knew. He took a breath, slid a knife carefully under the envelope flap, and removed the letter dot. It was a single page, folded in thirds and written in Evelyn's unmistakable handwriting, soft, looping, and full of grace. "My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then I'm gone. I hope it was peaceful. I hope you were there. But I also know how life works sometimes. So I need you to know something I could never say out loud. A year ago, I was contacted by a woman who claimed to know things about my past, things even I didn't remember. Her name was Rosa Caldwell. She worked at an adoption agency in Wyoming. She told me I was part of a secret adoption ring in the 1980s, that I had a twin sister, that my birth mother had been forced to give us up separately. I didn't believe her at first, but then she sent me pictures, a woman who looked just like me but harder, colder. I kept digging. Records were buried, missing, erased, but I believed it. I had a sister, somewhere out there. Then Rosa disappeared. The agency shut down. No answers, but before she vanished, she told me one thing that still haunts me. Your bloodline isn't done yet. A month later, I started getting messages. Someone left a package on our doorstep, a necklace I lost as a child. Then, a week before my final hospital stay, a stranger left a baby carrier on our porch. No baby, just a note. It said, "She's coming, Claire, if a child ever shows up with something of mine, especially my bracelet, please know this. She might be part of me, or part of someone I was supposed to find. I don't know what it means, but I feel it in my bones. If she finds Silas, then she's meant to be there. Tell him I loved him more than life. Tell him, maybe this is our second chance. Love always." Evelyn Silas stared at the letter, his hands trembling. His throat tightened so hard he could barely breathe. Twin sister, adoption ring, a message, she's coming. It felt impossible, insane. But the bracelet, the grave soil, the baby, Evelyn's words, all of it pointed to something real. He leaned back in his chair, running a hand down his face. "Jesus, Evie, what were you caught up in?" Juniper reached for the letter, her small fingers brushing the edge of the page. She smiled so simply, so naturally, as though she knew the truth already, as though she'd just been waiting for Silas to catch up. He folded the letter and placed it gently into a drawer beside Evelyn's old journal. Then he lifted Juniper into his arms, holding her tightly. "I don't know where you came from," he murmured, "but I swear to you I am going to find out." That evening, Silas called Claire again. Her voice came through quieter this time. "Unsure, I read the letter," he said. "I hoped it would give you answers," she replied. "It gave me more questions." Claire hesitated. "Silas, do you really think that baby's connected to Evelyn's twin? Some long-lost family, maybe even her sister's child? I don't know. But I do know someone went through a lot of trouble to get her here. And they wanted me to see that bracelet. This wasn't random." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said softly, "If you really believe that child is family, Silas, then you already know what to do." "I do," he said. That night, Silas sat outside on the porch, Juniper bundled in his lap. The stars blinked above like silent sentinels. Somewhere in the dark, a coyote howled. But the baby didn't flinch. She watched the stars as if they whispered secrets to her. He thought of Evelyn, her laughter, her eyes, the way she used to hum when she painted in the sunroom. "Is this you, Evie?" he asked quietly. "Is she your way of coming back?" Juniper turned and touched his face. He didn't cry, but something in him cracked open, just a little, and for the first time in 3 years, Silas Monroe felt alive. Silas Monroe didn't sleep that night. The letter from Evelyn kept playing in his mind, every word, every hidden truth. A sister she never knew, a mysterious woman named Rosa Caldwell, a child that was coming. The next morning, with Juniper nestled in a sling across his chest, Silas sat by the fireplace nursing a hot cup of black coffee. He stared into the flames, thinking. Then he remembered something. A name Evelyn once whispered in her sleep. Just once, weeks before she passed. Rosa. Don't take her. At the time, Silas thought it was a fever dream. Now it haunted him. He picked up the landline and called Sheriff Marla Jenkins. Monroe. She answered, her voice alert. You got something? I need to talk, he said, face to face. An hour later, they sat in the small sheriff's office in town. Silas held Juniper close while Marla scanned the copy of Evelyn's letter he had brought. When she reached the part about Rosa Caldwell and the adoption agency, her brow furrowed deeply. Rosa Caldwell. She muttered, that name rings a bell. You ever hear about this agency shutting down? Silas asked. Marla leaned back, tapping her pen on the desk. There was a scandal maybe 10 years ago. State-level investigation. Agency up north, near Billings. Shut down overnight. Word was, it was an illegal adoption front selling infants to desperate families. A lot of files disappeared. No one was ever charged. Silas's grip tightened. So Evelyn's story could be true. I'd say it likely is. Marla stood and pulled a binder from a cabinet. She flipped through until she found a faded photo of a woman with sharp eyes and straight black hair. That's Rosa Caldwell, she said, tapping the page. Vanished before the shutdown. Rumor was she kept a stash of files, blackmail, maybe insurance. Silas studied the image. She looked cold, calculating, like someone who knew too much. If she's still alive, he said. She has answers. Marla sighed. Problem is, no one's seen her in years. She dropped off the map. I'm going to find her, Silas said quietly. Silas, you're not a cop. You've got a baby to care for. And if what you're digging into is what I think it is, it could be dangerous. I don't care, he replied. Someone left this child for me. Someone took something out of my wife's grave. I'm not backing down. Marla stared at him. She hadn't seen this version of him since before Evelyn died. Determined, focused, fierce. All right, she said, but you're not doing it alone. I've got some contacts in Billings. Let me make a few calls. Silas nodded and stood. Keep me posted. As he turned to leave, Marla added, Silas, be careful. If Rose is involved, you're stepping into something deep. He paused. I already stepped in. I'm just trying to keep the baby from sinking with me. That night, back at the cabin, the wind kicked up hard across the plains. A storm was brewing in the distance, thunder rumbling like drums in the hills. Silas was rocking Juniper gently by the fire when something caught his attention, a flicker outside the window. He stood slowly and moved to the door. In the distance, near the edge of the fence line, stood a woman. She was tall, her coat flapping in the wind. Her face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but her stance was rigid, watchful. She didn't move. Silas narrowed his eyes. His instincts kicked in like they used to when rodeo danger was near. He stepped onto the porch. Who's there? He called. No answer. The wind howled louder. Mum, this is private land. You need to state your business. Still nothing. Then, just as suddenly as she appeared, the woman turned and walked into the mist, disappearing beyond the rise. Silas stood frozen for a full minute, heart racing. Then he turned back inside and locked the door. Later, as the storm finally rolled in and rain hammered the roof, Silas sat at the kitchen table again, his rifle resting beside him. Juniper was asleep once more, the firelight dancing on her bracelet. His phone buzzed. It was Marla. Got a hit, she said. One of my guys in Billings found something. There's an old contact of Rosa Caldwell still living under the radar. Name's Wallace Trent. He worked records for the agency. Might have kept something. Where? A truck stop south of Hardin. He's off the grid. Doesn't trust phones. If you go quiet. I'll leave at first light. Marla hesitated. You taking the baby? Silas looked at Juniper, then outside into the storm. I'm not letting her out of my sight, he said. Not anymore. The Montana sky was still pale with dawn as Silas Monroe packed a worn canvas bag with supplies. Juniper was secured snugly in a sling across his chest, sleeping peacefully, unaware of the storm of secrets they were walking into. The drive south to Hardin was long and mostly quiet, the endless prairie stretching out on both sides of the dusty road like an ocean of gold. Silas's mind churned with questions. Who was Wallace Trent? Would he talk? Would he confirm Evelyn's twin sister? Or was this just another ghost trail? By mid-afternoon, Silas pulled into a forgotten truck stop near the state line. The sign out front read Lilla's Gas and Grub in faded red paint, and the only working gas pump looked like it hadn't seen a full tank in a decade. Behind the shop, tucked into a corner by a row of dying pine trees, was a rusted-out trailer. This was the place. Silas knocked. It took a full minute before the door creaked open. A thin, hollow-eyed man stood behind it, his hair gray and unkempt, eyes sunken but sharp. You Monroe, the man rasped. Yeah, Silas replied. Wallace Trent. Trent looked him over. Then his gaze dropped to Juniper. His entire body stiffened. Come inside. Quick. The trailer smelled like dust and forgotten time. Yellowed paper files were stacked on every surface. On the wall, maps were pinned with colored tacks and red thread. Wallace sat across from Silas, poured a bitter-smelling tea, and didn't speak until Juniper was settled beside them on a couch. I remember Evelyn Monroe, Wallace said at last. She came through the system as Baby A. Her twin baby B was listed under another name. Adopted separately, by design, they were born into a troubled home. Mother was a runaway from a tribal reservation. The agency split them to erase the past. As Silas's heart pounded. You're telling me Evelyn had a twin, and someone didn't want that known? Wallace nodded. Rosa Caldwell led the whole thing. She was a master at erasing origins, paid well to keep people quiet. She made promises to both adoptive families, but I kept copies hidden, just in case. He reached under a floorboard and pulled out a metal lockbox. Inside were several faded documents, birth records, agency logs, photos. And there, tucked between pages, was a photo of two baby girls, swaddled side by side in a hospital bassinet. Silas's hands shook as he held it. Evelyn, and a second baby with the same face, the same deep green eyes. They called her Mara. Wallace said, the twin, but her life for it was hard. Bounced through homes. She came looking for answers a few years ago. She found Rosa, and when she found out Evelyn had lived a better life, Wallace's voice trailed off. Silas whispered, she wanted to take it back. Wallace gave a slow nod. Rosa vanished soon after. I think Mara realized she was pregnant. Then she left the child for Evelyn's husband. For you. Silas looked at Juniper. This baby, she's Mara's daughter, my wife's niece. She carries your wife's blood, Wallace said, and maybe her second chance. Silas sat in silence, the truth settling over him like a heavy blanket. Evelyn had a sister she never knew, a sister shaped by pain, and that sister had left her child, the child who now wore Evelyn's bracelet, as if passing the torch to someone who still had love left to give. Back at the ranch that evening, the plains were quiet again. Silas stood in the field with Juniper, watching the sky turn orange and purple over the distant hills. He whispered the whole story aloud to Evelyn, to the wind, to himself. "I'll raise her right," he said. "I don't know what kind of life Mara lived, but this little girl, she'll know love. She'll know truth, and she'll know where she came from." Juniper clutched his finger tightly. As the last light faded, Silas walked back toward the cabin. The loneliness that had followed him for 3 years no longer felt like a burden. It felt like space he was finally ready to fill. The ranch had changed. The silence was now filled with laughter, the soft shuffle of tiny feet, and the sound of lullabies Evelyn used to hum. Sheriff Marla came by more often, always smiling when she saw the toddler running through the sunflowers. Claire visited once a month, bringing photo albums and stories. They all called her Juniper, but Silas had given her a second name too, Juniper Ray, in honor of Evelyn. Some nights, Silas would still walk to the railroad tracks and stand where he'd first found her. The wind would blow across the prairie, and sometimes, just sometimes, he swore he could hear Evelyn's voice in it. "You found her," it whispered. "She found you." And Silas Monroe would smile, not because the pain was gone, but because something beautiful had taken root in its place.